So it seems like the what if conversation in the NBA is always a big one. We're always talking about what if Derrick Rose hadn't been injured, or what if the Magic would have actually been able to sign Tim Duncan, or what if Chris Paul would have actually ended up on the Lakers. But today I actually wanted to talk about some more recent what ifs. We're going to talk about the 5 biggest what if scenarios of the past 5 years in the NBA. And by what ifs, I tried to get these scenarios as ones that were very close to actually happening. Some of these were reported that it actually was going to happen, and we'll get to those obviously. But it's obviously not going to be, what if Steph and Giannis and Luka and LeBron all teamed up on the same team. No, these are going to be real scenarios that almost happened in our reality. Coming in at number 5, we have the Philadelphia 76ers choosing to keep Tobias Harris over Jimmy Butler. Well, what if they had gone the other way and kept Jimmy instead of Tobias? This changes essentially the entire landscape of the Eastern Conference, because the Miami Heat, over that stretch of time, obviously, the first year Jimmy goes to Miami in 2020, they go to the finals. The next year, they were kind of disappointing. They lost in the first round, I believe. But then 22, they went to an Eastern Conference final. 23, this past year, they were just in the finals again. So Jimmy going to the Heat has made them an absolute powerhouse in the Eastern Conference. And you look at how different things would be if Jimmy Butler would have actually stayed in Philadelphia. What happens with the Ben Simmons thing? There's a chance that Ben Simmons is traded a lot sooner if Jimmy's there, because we all know that Jimmy had his problems with the young guys in Minnesota. It was a big reason why he didn't work out there. Obviously, I don't think James Harden ends up in Philadelphia later down the line if Jimmy's still there. But yeah, I think if you ask any Sixers fan if they could press the button and go back, they're obviously taking this. They'd rather have Jimmy over Tobias. And, Jimmy, like I said earlier, he's contributed to the Heat being such a dominant power in the East. It's hard to say that Philly wouldn't have made it to the finals, because I think that they have a better roster. They would have a better roster around Jimmy than the Heat do currently, and that the Heat have had during this run. So this really changes a lot of things. I think you can even argue Philly would have a ring. Ben Simmons probably is traded sooner in this scenario, and it definitely changes a lot. Next up, we have the Luka Doncic and Trae Young 2018 draft night trade. So this move basically made it so that these two's careers are going to be tied together forever now, because they're always going to be compared. They're two really good talents. Obviously, Luka is better than Trae Young, but you look at their impact on the league and you look at their playoff success, it's kind of similar at this point, because they've both made it to an a conference final. Trae Young made it with the Hawks, obviously, in 2021. Luka, the year after that, made it with the Mavs in 22. So they both had pretty similar playoff success. I think they have a pretty similar game in that they're both playmakers. They're very ball dominant. But Luka, I think, has kind of separated himself as better than Trae Young. I think you can argue Luka Doncic is a top 5 player at this point in his career. And he's been on several All-NBA first teams, whereas Trae's never done that. So it's just kind of interesting looking back now that if you'd flip things around just to see how their careers might have played out differently if Luka was on the Hawks and Trae Young was on the Mavericks, because, originally that was what was supposed to happen. Now, I don't think that ultimately that much changes. I don't think one has a championship if they're on the other team or not. But I do think the Hawks fans are kind of kicking themselves. They wish that they had Luka over Trae, because, like I said, Trae is still a really good player. I'd probably put Trae Young around the top 20 to 25 players in the NBA, whereas, like I said, Luka's more of a top 5 player in the NBA. But their careers are always going to be intertwined for this, and it's always going to be a thing to look back on. And if whoever wins the championship first, I'm assuming it'll be Luka, but it could be Trae. He did surprise me in leading the Hawks to that conference final run in 2021. So, they're always going to be kind of entwined there together. And for number 3, we have Kevin Durant's foot being literally an inch behind the three-point line. You do not understand how much that shot changed the trajectory of the NBA. Because if Kevin Durant makes that shot, the Nets win the game and go on to the Eastern Conference Final. And I do believe that that matchup between the Bucks and the Nets in 21, that was the Eastern Conference Final, because whoever came out of that series, I think, was going to beat Atlanta. Atlanta was just an overachieving team that year. They were really young, and they just kind of struck lightning in a bottle. These were the two real top dog contenders, I believe, in the conference. And like I said, if Kevin Durant's foot is an inch back, they win the game. Basically means that they're going to go on to the finals, because like I said, I think they'd beat Atlanta. And who knows? It's up for grabs in the finals between Phoenix and Brooklyn. So this not only changes that, but it also changes a couple other things. Number one, Giannis doesn't have a ring still, because the 2 seasons after this one have been actually pretty disappointing seasons for the Bucks since then. And you even have some headlines now where Giannis is even talking about, like, if they don't make significant roster changes and don't commit to winning, like, he might actually leave Milwaukee. That would have been even more of a thing had they not won this championship in 2021. So you have that whole narrative still around that Giannis can't win a ring. The Big Three in Brooklyn, there's a good chance that the Big Three in Brooklyn is still intact to this day if that shot would have been a three, because even if they just made it to the finals alone, I don't think they're going to separate the very next year. Like, we were this close. I think it would be very difficult for them to separate. And obviously, if they won the title, again, I don't think that they're going to separate that fast. So this shot being just basically an inch shy really changed the landscape of the NBA. And now you have the Brooklyn Big Three is basically all completely disassembled. They're all gone from Brooklyn. And Milwaukee ended up going on to win the title as a result of this shot. So it just changed a lot. And I definitely do want to make a video just solely about the Brooklyn Big Three, but that's for another day. And for our number 2 what if, we have what if Kawhi Leonard signs with the Lakers back in the 2019 offseason. And this basically happened. Like, it was reported that he was going to the Lakers, and then I don't know exactly what happened. I mean, it's been talked about before, but essentially what happened is, like, he told the Lakers verbally that he would go to the Lakers, and then he kind of, like, backstabbed them and ended up going to the Clippers. And that was obviously a big story when it first happened, but there was, like, a good while there where it was reported he was going to be a Laker. And, like, I believed he was on the Lakers. So this was a crazy moment, obviously, because they already had LeBron and AD. If they would have added another piece to that, making a Big Three, could have went down as arguably one of the best, if not the best, Big Threes in the history of the NBA. I mean, the talent that these three would have had just in them alone. I mean, they bring so much versatility into the game between the three of them. You look at the playmaking ability of LeBron paired with the finishing and athleticism of Kawhi and Anthony Davis, and then look at the defensive side of the ball would have been insane, because we know Anthony Davis, when he's healthy and engaged, can challenge for best defensive player in the world. Same thing goes for Kawhi, especially on that perimeter. And LeBron, even when he's engaged, can be a really good defender. So this could have really been one of the most unstoppable teams. I know injuries still would have played a part, but it wouldn't have been as detrimental because you'd still have two of the other guys playing, or at least one of them playing. Whereas with the Clippers, they're both injured. Kawhi and Paul George just don't really play games. At least with the Lakers, like, yeah, they've had their injury problems as much. Not as much. They've had their injuries as well, but it's not been to the level of the Clippers. I mean, I literally think that Kawhi and PG played, 30 games together last season. But yeah, this would have changed, I think, not only the Western Conference, but just the NBA as a whole. And you really could have seen the Lakers establishing a whole new dynasty with this lineup here. So that brings us to number 1, which is what if Kevin Durant decides to stay with the Warriors in 2019 as opposed to leaving for Brooklyn? And obviously, the further you go back in time, the more changes. All the stuff that happened in Brooklyn definitely doesn't happen in this scenario. But I kind of just want to focus a little more on what happened with the Warriors. Because I think outside of 2020, the Warriors probably would have won every single ring up to that point. Because 2020 you kind of take out because Clay and KD both were hurt that year still. Steph, I know he technically got hurt. I think Steph could have played. The Warriors management was just kind of like, yeah, this is a down year. There's no reason for you to play. So they kind of played up his hand injury, I think, which made sense. I mean, there was no reason for Steph to play. But going into 2021, you look at, if you bring back that same Warriors team of Steph, Clay, KD, Draymond, and good role players around them, you're telling me that they can't beat that Bucks team. I think that they would pretty easily beat that Bucks team because Kevin Durant on the Nets basically by himself took that Bucks team to 7 games that same year. So I think the Warriors are pretty comfortably winning that. 22, the Warriors won it anyways. So adding KD to that, obviously, I think only helps that. And then this past year, they would have to contend with the Lakers. I think if KD was on that team, they would have beat the Lakers because they already took the 6 with extreme dysfunction within the team. They would have had to beat Denver, of course. Again, I think that Warriors team would have been able to handle Denver. I think Denver would have given them some problems just because Jokic is one of, if not the most unguardable players in the league. But I think ultimately they get by them. And then they would play the Heat. They would absolutely destroy the Heat. It wouldn't even be really that close. But that has been my top 5 what-ifs of the past 5 years. Go ahead and let me know what you thought of the video, and did I miss any? Thanks.